Hello, welcome to our talk. My name is Sofia Bodnar, and my guest today is Dr. Marta Dyczok, Associate Professor in Departments of Political Science and History in University of Western Ontario
Mhm.
and author of the book Ukraine, Not the Ukraine. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to talk about your book, Ukraine, Not
Mhm.
the Ukraine, which tackles such a crucial but often overlooked topic, the power of naming and how it shapes perceptions of Ukraine.
Mhm.
Your book focuses on the small but politically powerful detail of dropping the from Ukraine. Could you explain why that's not just grammatical preference, but something much bigger?
Absolutely. I mean, the book is a brief history of Ukraine. And when I was looking for a good title, this is what I immediately came to mind because so many people say the Ukraine, and I always correct them. And if I can, start a conversation and say, why do you say the Ukraine and not the Canada or the Poland? And then they'll often say, but I say the United States. And that is a grammatical issue because that's a plural. But countries are not called, the definite article isn't used. And the reason this is important is because using the phrase the Ukraine denotes a region, not a political entity. So the parallels are the Lebanon, the Argentine, places that used to be colonies that were labeled as part of an empire, or a region like the South, the Maritimes. So again, a region of the Russian Empire, a region of Russia. So immediately the image is the mental map that's created in somebody's head when they hear the Ukraine. It's like the South. So that is why it's important to say Ukraine. And it's a way for people, it's a conversation starter for people to say, oh, why have I been saying the Ukraine? And
Yes.
it's because that's the way they have been taught history. Because Ukraine's history has been taught from a Russian imperial perspective, and in some places continues to be taught that way. But that's why people think about Ukrainian history the way they do. And it's very similar to like, where do we learn things? In school. And how do we learn things? Our teachers teach us, plus we read books. So when I was a child going to school, the way I was taught Canadian history is European explorers crossed the ocean and discovered this place, and they settled it and built a civilization, and the people who were living there were primitive, and so the Europeans civilized them. That's the way. It's a positive story, right? It's, nice people came and made life better for others. But that is a colonial narrative because what actually happened is these Europeans, they came and they took the land from the people who lived there, the indigenous population, and they basically enslaved them. But that's not the way we were taught history when we were little kids. But that historical narrative in Canada has shifted. Nobody teaches history that way anymore. And this is what's happening in Ukraine. And not so much in Ukraine, but in the teaching of Ukraine in the English speaking world and beyond.
Yeah. And how do you see the role of language more broadly, not just country names, but the way we talk about Ukraine influencing international understanding?
Well, words matter. I mean, something I teach is media and politics. And the way we express things shapes the way people think about them. So, an example is for migration. People come to Canada, and media can say Canada is being swarmed with refugees. That creates a very negative image. Or the headline can read Canada welcomes people fleeing from war. That is a very positive image. So the words that are used to describe an event are crucial in the way they are then received by audiences. And that is part of, the information war and the disinformation war,
Mhm.
where people are deliberately using words to construct certain mental images and perceptions. Because one of the positive things that's happened as a result of this horrible escalation of Russia's war against Ukraine is that now more information is available in the world about Ukraine than ever before in history, whether it's in media or in culture or in politics or in any sphere. I was just listening to a CBC radio program where they were broadcasting concerts of Ukrainian composers. And this happens regularly now, and it didn't used to. And it's before the composers would be called Soviet composers, whether they were Ukrainian or Georgian or Uzbek, they were always called Soviet. Now they're called Ukrainian or Georgian or Uzbek. So that has changed dramatically for the better.
So what advice would you give to journalists, diplomats, or just people in general about how to use precise language when discussing Ukraine?
Well, I mean, that's not very difficult. It just, one of my favorite journalists is CNN's Christiana Amanpour, and she says truthful, not neutral. So you need to just find the facts and report on them as they are and avoid this both siding, which sometimes is a problem because Western journalists are used to having to report both sides. This person said this person said that. And that is a very good rule of thumb. But in a rape case, you wouldn't say, let's give equal weight to the voice of the rapist and the rape victim, right? So you need to make sure that you are presenting things fairly. And I think journalists who are quality journalists, they understand how to do this. And then there's the issue of editors because headlines are constructed by editors, not the journalists themselves. But I mean, this is getting away from, my book, Ukraine, Not the Ukraine. This is getting more into media representations. But I think a big challenge now is we're living in a social media era.
Yeah.
And professional journalists, for the most part, do accurate jobs in reporting. But it is all the bloggers and all the people who are not trained journalists who present all sorts of information. Some of it is accurate, some of it is not. And then it's up to individuals to wade through what's true, what's not true. And if you're not informed, that's almost impossible to do. I mean, I'm not an expert on, let's say, Venezuela. So if I come across information of the politics, I don't have the toolkit to wade through what's true, what's not true. I need to trust the journalists to have done that for me. So
yes, and I guess the main topic of your book is not really that focused on media, but a big part of history also depends on how Western media has historically shaped perceptions of Ukraine. And I know that media is also one of your research topics. So where do you think Western media still gets Ukraine wrong, even now after the full-scale invasion?
well, let's unpack that. Western media is a broad category. So I'll comment more on English language media because I don't follow the German and French and Italian press very carefully. I would say that for the most part, the professional journalists, and here I'm talking about the legacy media outlets, I think they're doing a pretty good job reporting on Ukraine. I follow certain journalists who are on the ground. So, I mean, the Globe and Mail's Mark McKinnon does a fabulous job, and Financial Times, Yaroslav Trofimov does a great job, and The Guardian's Luke Harding does a great job. So these journalists, they're the ones that are traveling to Ukraine or be based in Ukraine, and they're doing a really good job. So I don't think that we can talk about sort of media as a whole. We do occasionally see articles popping up in major media outlets, which the spin is off. So the perception, the perspective is a little bit off. I think I mean, journalists tend to report what they see and what politicians say.
Mhm.
And one thing that, again, the journalists I've named, and I could name others who are also doing a very good job reporting on Ukraine, you and McDonald and so on, um, they know the Ukraine story. And it's people who are parachuted in, like they pop in for something and they don't know the language and they don't know the story and they don't have the contact. So they sometimes will get the story a little bit off.
Mhm.
Um, so there's a distinction I would make between people who regularly cover Ukrainian politics and history and so on, and those who are just sort of filling in for somebody briefly. Um, One of the things that I think not just media and journalists, but most people have continually underestimated Ukraine.
Mhm.
And, starting with the very beginning of the war, when everybody expected President Zelensky to leave, and that famous quote, I need ammunition, not a ride.
Yeah.
And, it's been 3.5 years. And Ukraine has stood up to, the second largest army in the world. And on Sunday, June 1st, launched this amazing drone attack deep in Russian territory, which, it's going to be one for the textbooks. And nobody expected this. So I think I wouldn't say that they're getting the story wrong. They're not seeing everything that there is to see.
Do you ever feel like media often simplifies Ukraine's image, portraying it as either victim or a hero? And if so, what important complexities or nuances do you think are often lost?
Well, I mean, I would agree with you that very often media presents things um, in a clear way, I would say. But I think that's part of being a good journalist is taking a lot of information that is very complicated and presenting it in a way that somebody who is not an expert will be able to understand it and also to make it engaging so that somebody will continue reading beyond the headline.
Mhm.
So that's what makes a good journalist, right? Getting all of that. And inevitably, things will become, I mean, I don't want to use the word simplified, but they'll be just presented clearly. And I think that's just the nature of journalism. And I think that people who can do that effectively, whether they're journalists or academics, are the ones that are having an impact. Because we live, as you know, we live in the digital information age where people's attention spans are very short. And, nobody's going to read a big fat book.
Yeah.
So that's why my book is a very little book, because that's something that is digestible for people.
Yes, and I guess it's something when you meet a person that is not very informed on Ukraine and you want to help them get informed if they're interested, it's something that would actually be digestible for them to
Mm-hmm.
learn something.
Mm-hmm.
Looking ahead, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Ukraine's future. If you were to write an updated edition or follow up to Ukraine, Not the Ukraine Today, what new themes or chapters would you want to include?
That is a very good question, and I'm going to have to think about that because, I mean, the book that I wrote, and I'll show it to you because I don't know if your audience has seen it. It's a history book, but it's really thin, so everybody can read it. And within that book, I talk about both the history and the current history. So the final chapter is about the current war. Um, in the epilogue, it's sort of forward looking. I think once the war is over, the um, the geopolitics will have changed tremendously, and that we have to wait and see what
Yeah.
happens. And I can only write about events after they've happened, not before they've happened. So,
When you imagine post-war Ukraine, what do you think will be the biggest challenge, not just rebuilding physically, but also emotionally and culturally?
another very good question. I think there will be many challenges. Um, I think that there will be political, economic, social, emotional, demographic challenges. There's going to be a huge divide between the people who stayed in Ukraine and the people who left, because some people will want to come back. And so that's going to be a challenge. There will be a new category of society, which who are the veterans, people who actually put their lives on the line and were fighting and lost limbs and so on. So that's going to be a new constituency that didn't previously exist. And again, that's in the political realm and the economic and social and so on. And I think they're going to organize and they are going to introduce various changes. Something that we're already seeing happening during the war, which I think will intensify afterwards, the media landscape, something I studied, that's transforming and will continue to do so. The economic structure has changed already. And so the old economic system where you've got the oligarchs and then a small middle class and a very small businessmen, that's transforming. And so that transformation will continue. Integration with Europe is another huge thing that's already happening and will continue to intensify. So again, these are many things that will happen. But again, this is not my area of expertise. So this is just kind of very general comments I'm making.
Do you feel like writing this book changed you personally in some ways? Did it reshape your own relationship with Ukraine in unexpected ways?
Well, it was an opportunity to revisit Ukraine's history. And I want to tell you a little bit about how this all came about. This was in the first year of escalated war. This was just like a month or two after Russia's full-scale invasion. I was contacted by Professor Mark Adele from Australia, and he put together a new series with Cambridge University Press, short books explaining complicated topics to general audiences. And he said, would you be willing to write a book about Ukraine? And I immediately said, yes, I would love to. And he said, okay, great, but it has to be short and it has to be written in a way that's easily accessible for general audiences. And so my task, as I saw it, was to take 1,000 years of history and put it into 70 pages in a way that you will want to keep reading it. And so I didn't realize how hard it would be to do that, because 1,000 years of history, that's a lot of history. So I chose to focus on people, and I organized the book in, historically, the chronology, I changed it a little bit so that it generally follows the Hrushevsky scheme, but instead of calling it the Kyivan Rus era, I called it the Cossacks and the princes and the nation builder. So the focus was on people as a way of making the history come alive. And so what I needed to do for each chapter was to think about who are the key people in this period of history who shaped history. So that for me was a new way of engaging with Ukrainian history, because those of us who've studied Ukrainian history and worked with Ukrainian history, we know the historical figures. But again, I wanted to make it interesting. So in the chapter about the Kyivan Rus era, which I called the princes, I also wanted a woman in. So I thought, okay, which woman am I going to highlight? And I chose Anne Yaroslawna, the daughter of Grand Prince Yaroslav, because she's such an interesting historical figure. So I highlighted her. And then to fast forward the last chapter, which is about the war, which I called the defenders, because they're defending Ukraine. Again, who do I put as sort of my feature characters? And Maria Berlinska, she's one of them. And she's a former student from University of Kyivan Hill Academy who left her studies and went to pilot drones even though she didn't know anything about drones, she realized this is something that would be important. So she's one of the characters that I highlighted. So writing this was an opportunity to, again, to think about the different people and to sort of make them not just dry characters, but make them come alive. So Mikhailo Hrushevsky, he's not just, the famous historian and Ukraine's first president, man with a beard and glasses. He's sitting in his library and he's writing. And, like I tried to make him come alive, but you have to read it and tell me if I made the characters interesting. And of
Yeah.
course, I'm not going to tell you what I wrote about Stepan Bandera. I'm going to make you read the book. So I hope you'll find that interesting as well.
And let's say for readers who finish your book and they want to keep learning and supporting Ukraine, especially for English-speaking readers who don't have access to Ukrainian sources,
Mhm.
what would you recommend they read or they do next?
Well, they just go to the back of the book where I have provided a further reading section because I'm expecting that people will read and say, oh, I'd like to know more about the nation builders. So at the end of the book, there's a further reading section which is organized to follow each chapter. So there's a section which lists the sort of the big classical history books, Hrushevsky, Subtelny, Maguchi, Pluchy, all the big history books, so you can read the whole history. And then chapter by chapter, I direct people to specialized reading. So if you're interested in the princes, there's 10 sources that I've provided saying, here's where you can learn more. If you want more about the Cossacks, here's the top 10 sources on the Cossacks and so on and so forth. So that's built into the book. And then, from there you can continue looking in their bibliographies and keep learning.
Mhm. And are a majority of those readings available to read in English?
Oh, they're all in English.
Okay, perfect.
They're all in English.
Okay, well, thank you so much for this conversation, Marta. It's been incredibly insightful, and I know our listeners will walk away with so much to think about and hopefully will get interested in this book and purchase it. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed this conversation, please don't forget to like this video and follow Art Talk channel. And thank you for watching.
Thank you. You can buy the book. I would love it if you bought the book, but the book is also available open access.
Perfect.
So I made that deliberately so that it would be available for anybody who wants to read it. So if you just type in Ukraine, not the Ukraine, and my last name, DYCZOK, it'll come up and you can download it for free. But some people, they like to actually hold the book in their hands. So you can buy a hard copy or a Kindle copy. So just enjoy it and let me know what you think. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for the conversation.